Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Today we're going to be discussing managing vacation rentals during a pandemic. I'm Rachel Branson. I'm the Professional Development Manager here at NC REALTORS. I've got a couple things I'd like to cover with all of you before we really get started. First, I'd like to let you all know that today's session is being recorded and will be made available to all of you via email later this week. Second, I'd like to let you all know that if you have any technical issues during today's webinar, that you can reach out to the tech helpline, and their contact information will be provided in the chat field in the next couple of minutes. And the last thing I'd like to cover is if you have any questions at all today, throughout today's webinar, please leave those questions in the Q&A field at the bottom of your screen, and we'll make sure to try to answer all of those for all of you at the end of today's session. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you all to today's moderator. Trisha Hallworth serves as the president of the North Carolina Vacation Rental Managers Association. She's been in the industry for over 25 years and is the broker in charge for Bald Head Island Limited, as well as the broker in charge for the Intercoastal Realty's property management operations. Trisha, welcome, and I'll go ahead and turn everything over to you. Oh, hold on, let's see here. Let's try to get you unmuted, Trisha. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. I might need to reach out to that tech hotline. Thank you again, Rachel. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Managing vacation rentals during the pandemic have presented us all with new challenges, to say the least. NC VRMA, along with VRMA and NC REALTORS, are among some of the state organizations who have worked tirelessly to promote our association members and to provide guidance to them, to the legislators and the general public, and give information and guidance throughout this pandemic. It's through the work of industry leaders that we've been able to help craft and influence policies and provide a framework of guidance to our rental agency industry. A little about NC VRMA. Our members come from all over the state, and our mission is to promote the vacation rental industry. We're grateful for the NC REALTORS for their help in managing our day-to-day administration functions, and of course, Rachel for working to organize today's webinar. I'm very excited to introduce today's panel. We have Greg Holcomb, Government Relations Director at VRMA, Will Martin, General Counsel at NC REALTORS, and Seth Palmer, Director of Regulatory Affairs and External Communications at NC REALTORS. To kick off the discussions, I thought it would be important to take a moment to give everybody a brief update on the vacation rental business in the state and some statistics. LSI Data Insight has provided us with some statistics for the state, and they've also broken it up into 3 different regions: the Outer Banks, western part of the state, and the southeastern part of the state. In your follow-up webinar packet, Rachel mentioned to you that this will include graphs about these statistics and where you can actually sign up to participate in Data Insight. So the data shows that paid occupancy, that is arrivals for this year, did take a dip during the COVID restrictions. Before the restrictions, our paid occupancy for the state was trending on par with 2019. Emerging from the lockdowns, we began to see, as the restrictions started to lift and notifications about the restrictions and that they were going to be lifted, we saw an immediate uptick in the bookings for paid occupancy throughout all regions of the state. And around May 15th, paid occupancy met historical numbers and then quickly began to surpass them. And that trend is continuing through the rest of the year. The data suggests that despite what was lost in the spring, many agencies are predicting that they will be on par with 2019, if not above 2019 numbers by the time we hit year-end 2020. And another significant number that the data shows suggests how strong the rental market is going to be moving forward. It looked at same bookings per 100 homes throughout the state, and they were up significantly. And 2021 bookings are already trending higher than our historical bookings for future years. So all of this is really good news for our industry, and that's why we're also very excited about bringing the panelists on board and having them talk to some of the experiences that we've had and that we continue to go through. So the first thing we want to look at today, and I do thank each of the panelists in advance, is the vacation rental business is doing well, which we can see that from the data, is when what do we learn from this past spring, and what have our takeaways in terms of navigating the future should there be a fall wave. So I'm going to pass it to the panelists now to weigh in on their short-term rental bans, the shelter-in-place orders, and any suggestions or actions that they took or things that they want to share with us now. So again, panelists, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Sure. So thank you, Trisha, and thank you, NC VRMA, for inviting myself and Will and Greg to participate in this panel. On behalf of NC Realtors, thank you also to all of the vacation rental managers, property managers, and other realtors who are attending today's panel. When we look at how things have gone over the spring and now into the summer, we have certainly been appreciative of all of the work that real estate licensees and realtors, property managers, and all people across the state have taken to ensure the continued opportunity for real estate transactions to occur. We were fortunate as a state to remain in a setting where in most counties real estate was deemed essential, and so it was allowed to continue throughout stay-at-home orders. But we've also learned a lot about how to deal with stay-at-home orders and understand them. We were all very knowledgeable with the practices during traditional evacuations under hurricanes or other weather events, but learning and understanding the roles and responsibilities that any real estate practitioner has during a stay-at-home or a health-related evacuation or closure order has been a learning process. We have been consistently working with legislative and other elected leaders across the state to present our perspective and understanding for the role that the industry plays on the state's economy. But we know that continued protection of health and safety of all individuals and all citizens in North Carolina is of vital importance. Through our advocacy efforts, we continue to engage at the legislative and the regulatory levels to make sure that any policies which move forward are opening up and continuing to provide opportunities. We can certainly, throughout this conversation, highlight a lot of examples and conversations and situations that have occurred, but that's kind of a general overview of where we see things. And certainly if or when there is a fall wave or a secondary impact on the state as a whole due to COVID-19 or any future issue, I do feel that the association and our leadership are prepared, but also moving forward with an understanding that preparation does not always mean complete and total understanding of the situation. So I'm glad to pass it to Will or to Greg.
Do you have anything to add, Greg? Yeah, I would just say I'm Will Martin. I'm counsel for NCAR, and we all have learned a lot this spring. I don't know how many stay-in-place orders I looked at and scratching my head trying to figure out to what extent they affected the practice of real estate. And of course, we all were familiar with the road closures in Dare County. That was a real wake-up call for us. And I do think I've got a better grasp now from a legal perspective about, and a lot of it's based on some very helpful input that we've gotten from the Real Estate Commission. You've gotten a couple of letters, I think, sent to you with the Real Estate Commission's position on a couple of important issues about refunds and whether or not they're required. So I feel like I've got a pretty good idea now what the laws are and what the Real Estate Commission's position is on refunds. You know, it basically comes down to whether or not the property's available. You know, is there a road closure or some other governmental order that's going to prohibit the tenant from even coming to the property? And if so, they're probably entitled to a refund. If there's not some sort of an order in place that prohibits them from traveling to the rental, they're probably not entitled to a refund. I say that, and I know that in the vast majority of cases, I understand that you all have been working with guests and with your owners to process refunds, change reservations to later dates. And so my hat's off to you all for your job in managing all of this. You know, I know it's been a very challenging time for you. And, you know, we haven't gotten a whole lot of questions on the hotline. I asked my two partners this morning if they had any great hotline questions from involving vacation rentals, and they really didn't have a whole lot, you know. So to me, that's a testament to you know, the hard work you all have done in keeping these most of these from becoming problems, you know. And I'm really I really appreciate, you know, the work you all have been doing in that regard. But you know, if push comes to shove and it gets to be a legal situation, I do feel like we've got a better grasp now on the legalities. And those of you who are realtors, feel free to use our legal hotline. We handle, gosh, I had 20 calls yesterday morning. So we get a lot of calls about a lot of different kinds of things. And if you've got something you want to brainstorm with us about, you know, don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call our hotline, and Bill, John, or I, whoever's handling the hotline, will be happy to discuss your situation with you.
And I also want to remind everyone that if you have a question, post it in the Q&A, and we'll certainly take as many questions and get answers to them as we can. Do we have anything else on that topic from the panelists? So we'll move on then to the next topic that our members had requested that we cover, and this was reopening strategies and the impact on the way we currently do business. And it is important to have a strategy in place, as we all know, to reassure our local officials, our owners, and our guests that professionally managed homes are a viable part of the accommodations mix. And our panelists continue to be active on an ongoing, and have ongoing dialogue and be active in this reopening phases as we continue to go through them. And so I'd ask the panelists to weigh in on what regulations and best practices and advice can you share with those on the webinar concerning reopening strategies, and anything that you can share would be appreciated.
Yeah, Tricia, I can go ahead and step in there. So early on, we saw a need from our members reaching out to us, individual property owners reaching out to us from across the country, looking for counsel on how to deal with the situation. Everything with from, you know, my community shut us down, what do we do, to we're allowed to rent, but I'm afraid to do it, what do I do? And how to handle a lot of this, the various aspects of renting out a vacation home. Through that, we compiled a group of experts from across the country through our Vacation Rental Housekeeping Professionals organization, and put together the Safe Home program, which are a set of guidelines for cleaning the units and using the best practices available that we know of to help you understand how to clean the homes, but also to provide some support to the local governments and state governments to know that there are professional managers out there that are handling these properties as a professional accommodation, you know, and keeping it up in par with a hotel from that stance. In a lot of states, or several states, we had issues where hotels were allowed to stay open and vacation rentals were shut down completely. And so these standards, guidelines that we put together were something to help, you know, convince those policymakers that it was safe to reopen vacation homes. And we were very successful in actually getting that through in Georgia. The governor actually rescinded his order banning vacation homes early because of that. And then in Florida, we had 10 counties actually adopt our Safe Home program as part of their reopening guidelines that they submitted to the state to get the governor's approval to reopen. After that, we saw the need for a lot of these communities as the reopening process began to increase with the phase 2s and 3s, and put together a Safe Communities program, which expands it outside of just cleaning to other aspects of the rental and how it interacts with the community. And this was put together, a lot of it's based on the Hilton Head Chamber of Commerce effort to keep Hilton Head open during the pandemic. And one of our board members was actually very integral in that aspect of creating that program. And so these, you can find these, they'll be in the packet that's sent out after this. You can also find it on the website that I'll go ahead and put in the chat for everyone. You can find those documents on there as well.
Yeah, and building off what Greg was talking about, NC Realtors and kind of the real estate industry holistically in North Carolina has really been working to push and promote the guidelines that are already in place at the state and at the federal level. The CDC guidelines are something that truly control, especially in North Carolina, where we don't, for vacation rentals, where we don't have a particular specific policy which governs how vacation rentals have to manage themselves from a health and safety standpoint on pandemic per se. And really just trying to continue to keep the conversation going, that the vital nature of the rental industry and truly the real estate industry holistically to the economy, and that it can be done safely through utilizing the 3 W's, the wear, the wait, and the wash components to wear your mask, wait and keep 6 feet of social distancing, and wash, sanitize, and disinfect to the greatest extent possible. And there's been legislation and continued conversation by the General Assembly about how to provide some relief, some assistance to vacation rental managers and others. While I can't sit here today and tell you that they have currently been successful, it's not been without a lot of hard work on behalf of a lot of organizations and individuals. The main sticking point on legislation like House Bill 1224, which would provide opportunities for financial assistance that is similar for vacation rental management companies, managers, as it is for hoteliers, is in some complications that were found with the application of CARES Act money. So it was certainly a challenge that a lot of issues and industries are facing as states try to apply CARES Act monies to various situations that they are facing, their business communities are facing. The General Assembly of North Carolina is currently out on a bit of a break. They will be back in September, on September 2nd, to look at additional monies and additional opportunities to provide relief. And NC Realtors will continue our advocacy related to this piece of legislation, as well as a lot of others that we've been working on that focus on providing relief and assistance to mortgage holders, to renters, to property managers, to landlords, to anyone who has been negatively affected by the economic downturn. But we continue to promote and expound upon best practices. I mean, the more we find, the more we are able to promote for our individual members. As NC Realtors is not a science-based organization. We're not the health experts, but we recognize that there are health experts out there, much as Greg touched on in the work that VRMA at the national level has done in engaging with partners and others who are in the medical community, understand these complex issues, and are able to provide very detailed direction. We certainly appreciate all of that work. And there's also a lot of efforts that are going on in the restaurant and lodging industry. Those of you on the call have probably seen the Reopen NC platform that Restaurant and Lodging Association has put forth in partnership with Department of Health and Human Services. That's certainly a great platform, and one that we are certainly continuing to promote to anyone who has direct interaction with tenants and with others. But there will always be a need to continue to do more, and we stand available to provide any resources, much like Greg said, that we continue to find access to or find valuable.
I was asked when we were discussing dividing up the agenda yesterday if I would just say a few words about reopening of offices. You all in the vacation rental business, your offices are probably open. You have a lot of interaction, I think, with guests when they're coming and going, I suppose. And so, you need to be mindful of, what processes are you going to put in place to try to protect your employees and your rental managers, as well as guests. And, I'm certainly not an expert in health, but I know that from a legal perspective, you need to get your hands on some good guidelines, like Greg was referring to earlier, and review them. And you're probably not going to be able to implement all of them. Some of them just aren't going to be reasonable given the makeup of your offices and the way you do business. And don't worry about that. Just take the ones that seem like they're reasonable and that you can implement, maybe modify, and go with them, and try to apply them, and you'll probably be fine. As a general rule, you've got to use reasonable efforts in the operation of your business. And, if somebody tries to pick at something you've done and claims that you haven't, that you're liable for something, if you can demonstrate that, you gave, the particular issue your thoughtful attention and developed some protocols, and that you followed those protocols, that's very important. You can't just have a piece of paper and not follow them. That's almost worse than, not establishing protocols. But if you have established some reasonable protocols and make a good faith effort to follow them, you're probably going to be okay. And I went and looked yesterday. I think this is going to be in the packet of information that you all are going to be sent on the NAR website, a workplace reentry checklist that covers, different protocols for preparing the workspace and addressing policies pertaining to your employees and training your employees. That's very important that, if you adopt a policy, your employees need to understand, how it works and what's going to be expected of them. And most of it's common sense stuff. So I would encourage you, if you haven't already got a checklist that you're using, to consider this or, some other checklist and use it. At the end of the day, for civil liability standpoint purposes, your conduct is going to be judged by, what would a reasonably prudent broker do, with respect to whatever the issue is that's being complained about. And largely that's judged based on prevailing practice in the industry, and specifically in the location where you're located. So, what are your fellow managers doing with their offices? I mean, that's actually relevant when it's being when you're trying to determine if somebody met the applicable standard of care, you got to determine what that standard of care is, and what other similarly situated real estate professionals in your marketplace are doing would be relevant in answering that question. So, get yourself a good checklist, follow it, and pay attention to what other professionals in your area are doing. And don't follow them if they're not doing anything, but if they've got some good things that they're doing, just rip them off and start doing them yourself too. So that's my 2 cents. Oh, Seth, I know we talked yesterday. Are you going to talk about House Bill 118 at any point? Were you going to mention that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Seth, yeah, there's a state law that's been enacted, I think, July 2nd, that sort of speaks to what I'm talking about right now in terms of your potential liability. So anyway, I won't steal Seth's thunder on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very informative. Did any of the panelists have any other thing to add under reopening before we move on to the next topic? Okay. Okay, so really going right into what Will was talking about is a concern about protection for the agencies from legal actions from rental guests and from employee claims. And so I know that our panelists have some good information to share about that. So I will toss it back to the panelists for comments on liability issues and protections.
Yeah, so from a national standpoint, kind of a trend, or not trend, the Congress has taken up liability in regards to consumer or the liability protection for businesses from consumers. Nothing has been passed as of yet. There are some state efforts that are happening through the regulatory process. And this is something that I would advise to keep a really close eye on because they're kind of hidden. They're usually through the state's OSHA process or department. One of them, Virginia, just passed a regulatory regulation on infectious disease in terms of how it impacts employees and what an employer is liable for. And there are some protections in there, but there's also a lot more hurdles to overcome to make sure that you're protected. Oregon is also looking at something similar. And a lot of this is coming about because Congress has not taken action. So we're seeing individual states taking up infectious disease regulation in terms of employment. And the good and bad thing is, good thing is there at least something that is coming about. The bad thing is we're going to have a patchwork of regulations across the country. So there is some concern there.
And to speak more specifically to the state issue, and Will alluded to it here, North Carolina's been taking a look at liability protections very similar to the rationale that Greg laid out, because the federal government has not. And there has been some dichotomy in the conversation about protecting the liability of the business while also protecting the health and safety of individuals. So House Bill 118 was passed and signed into law by the governor on July the 2nd, and it strengthens some original liability protections that were put in place in Senate Bill 704, which was kind of the original coronavirus response bill from the legislature in early April. That bill was all-encompassing, included a lot of extensions of things like remote online notarization, the Good Fund Settlement Act, a lot of other things we could spend a whole separate webinar talking about, and you can find resources and explanations of those and other NC Realtors resources like the Weekly Realtor Advocate. But House Bill 118 really provides a protection of claims to businesses resulting from contraction of COVID-19 if the business does, as Will laid out, work in good faith. more than anything. Looking at, it doesn't provide immunity for any act or omission accounting for to gross negligence or willful or wanton contact or intentional wrongdoing. So you have to continue to comply with state and other health-based orders, and you have to provide some notification and reassurance to individuals through signage, like signage at the door to wear a mask, to wash your hands, to keep social distancing. That's really where the duty of the business owner is most in place. This also doesn't specifically apply to workers' comp. We've been looking at that on a separate side because there was a piece of legislation known as House Bill 1057 that looked at a very blanket opportunity for a workers' comp claim that could be levied against an employer related to contracting COVID-19 while employed or on the job. This was a bit more of a complicated issue. The overarching intent of the legislation was to primarily benefit first responders, those who were essential workers, but in a different mindset than what most of the business community interpreted as essential businesses. And even what some of the sponsors of the legislation intended for it to encompass. They were really thinking more of your true first responders, those who are on the front lines providing key health services to individuals. Because of the blanket opportunity presented under the state stay-at-home order, a lot of folks were designated as essential businesses, and especially in the rental industry where you do have W-2 employees. Many of you may be W-2 employees, very different to that of the traditional real estate brokerage industry where the majority are 1099 and don't have any workers' comp protections. That legislation could have a very negative impact on the business operations of vacation rental managers, property managers, commercial realtors. And so we were able, through work with a large coalition of stakeholders in the business community, to push that bill back significantly and ask for it to be worked on a lot more. It's pretty much stalled out and likely will not be heard during this session. But kind of building off another question that Trisha asked us to cover, as far as legislation moving forward, especially in a liability or in an operational standpoint, it's a bit unclear to us as to what may be coming forward. As we touched on, the General Assembly has been very focused on trying to provide some form of relief utilizing the monies that the state was appropriated through the Federal CARES Act, but those have been limited. At the same time, the General Assembly knows that revenues for the state will be down. The current projections place a revenue shortfall somewhere in the $3 to $6 billion range. We just had tax day on the 15th, so we'll be able to have a little bit better understanding of where the revenues are and to better project the budget and future impacts to the state as a whole. But looking at legislation, I do know that there will continue to be opportunities and interest in having more abilities for businesses to remain open. We will certainly monitor those as best we are able and provide any questions and ask specific questions. We really appreciate the interaction that the NC Realtors team has with the NC VRMA team and all of their members to understand how these policies, which are made in Raleigh, apply to practitioners on the coast, in the mountains, and in other parts of the state. That's a great perspective that we're able to present. And it really just continue as I always promote in all of my conversations with realtors and other practitioners: stay informed, stay engaged, and don't ever hesitate to reach out to the team at NC Realtors, whether it's to Will and the legal hotline or to myself and the regulatory side. If there's something that we can't answer, we'll do our best to find an answer, and even if there's not actually an answer. So I know Will's going to touch on a couple employee requirements or anything that he didn't cover on his last discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. I don't really have a whole lot of particular things. I would refer to this reentry checklist that I referenced earlier for protocols to try to protect your employees. But I tell you one thing I feel pretty strongly about. I do give advice to a number of local associations and, of course, to the state association. You really need to try to protect your employees, and you need to try to protect yourself from claims from your employees. The National Association of Realtors negotiates an E&O policy that provides some pretty good coverage to local and state associations as well as NAR for errors and omissions. And they always report at their legal seminar what are the claims being filed, what are the areas that they're getting complaints about or claims, to the policy. And it's pretty solidly employment-related claims are the number one typically. So, you need to be very mindful of that. Of course, you want to protect your employees because you like them, but you also want to protect against claims. And I feel pretty strongly, I've had this discussion with a couple of local associations about reopening and interactions with members who come in for business. I can see this happening in your industry too. You got guests walking in, or whoever's coming into your offices and dealing with your employees, that you need to protect them. And I had one local association executive say, this is a real political issue about wearing a mask. Unfortunately, it's gotten politicized, and gosh, that's not surprising given the politicized state that we're in this country. But without trying to be political, I feel very strongly that you ought to require folks that come into your office to be wearing a mask at the very least, and follow protocols, whether they philosophically believe that it's necessary or not. And even if it's not required under, some state law, I feel like you ought to protect your employees by requiring people that they're going to have to deal with in your offices to protect themselves and to wear masks and, sanitize their hands when they come in. Whatever protocols you decide on, I think they need to be applied pretty stringently across the board. And if you've got somebody that says, this is BS, I don't believe in any of this stuff, it's all been made up, I'm not going to do it. It's a hard thing. They're a member of your association or a vacation rental guest or whoever they are. But I think it's important that you draw the line and say, hey, listen, this isn't about politics. This is about protecting, our employees. So I feel pretty strongly about that. The other thing I was going to mention in this area was, I haven't been asked this question in a while, but I got a bunch of questions early on. I work with forms a lot, and we've developed a couple of forms, mostly pertaining to sales transactions, residential sales transactions. I was asked if the Association of NC Realtors was going to develop any kind of indemnity or hold harmless type of agreement that a property manager could use with a vacation rental guest that would protect the property manager from potential liability if the guest contracted COVID-19. I'm not a fan of those, and we haven't developed one. And I've got several reasons for it, and I won't get into a lot of detail, but I don't have any problem if you may have one now that you're using, and I think that's fine. But I don't think they're necessary. Probably for one thing, to be able to prove that where somebody contracted COVID-19, just a causation issue is going to be quite difficult for a plaintiff who's trying to sue a vacation property manager claiming that they got COVID-19, in their office or in the rental unit. It's going to be very difficult to establish. That's where you got it for purposes of establishing liability. Even if you can establish it, I think there's an assumption of risk. The notion is that, if you voluntarily submit yourself to a known and present danger, you're going to be deemed to have assumed the risk of something happening that was foreseeable. And we should all assume probably that everybody we come into contact with might be infected with COVID-19, and that would include vacation rental guests. If they're gonna rent a property, they're assuming a certain amount of risk, and I think that's going to make it also difficult for them to prevail if push came to shove and they tried to sue you. I also question the enforceability of it. I won't give you my legal analysis on that, but I question whether or not it's legally enforceable. And the last thing I'll say quickly is that, although I'm not sure the rule would technically apply, there's a real estate commission rule that says you can't insert a provision in a standard sales contract, printed offer sales contract form, containing any provision that attempts to disclaim the liability of a broker for his or her representation in connection with the transaction. Maybe not applicable to a vacation rental, it's not a sales transaction, but just the idea that an agent would try to insert a provision in a rental contract, say, that would absolve the agent of liability for something that they might be liable for. I just think the principle is one that would apply to this situation too. And I just don't think they're a good idea. I don't think they're necessary. I think there's a real question about their enforceability. So if you have them, I don't think there's anything wrong with them. But I think people sometimes tend to emphasize they think about the hold harmless release aspect of something. And I think the focus really needs to be on taking reasonable measures to protect people and then being able to demonstrate that you've done so. So keep a record, of your efforts. And I think that'll go a long way toward protecting you in the event somebody tries to say you're liable for something. That's it for me.
Yeah, thank you. That's very informative, both Will, Seth, and Craig. I do want to say to NC Realtors a big thank you for getting the rental homes included in that House Bill 118. That took some work on the part of NC Realtors to help get the vacation rental homes mentioned in that. So we do appreciate that. So what we want to talk about next is trends, and ask the panelists, do they see any trends and anything to look for in the next weeks ahead and the months ahead as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I can go ahead and kick that off with some national trends that we've been seeing. As Trisha mentioned in the beginning of the call, the local social data that was provided, they show that there's clearly a demand out there for vacation rentals and for travel. People were cooped up for a long time, and we all want to get out of the house. We're going a little stir crazy. But the trend is localized travel. It's drive-in markets, several hundred miles only from the location, and a lot of more traditional vacation destinations, the beaches, the mountains, off the beaten path places. We've seen high demand as well. One of the areas that we have seen a trend in is a loss of inventory in very urbanized markets. So your larger cities have definitely seen some loss of inventory and demand. I think part of it has to do with concentration of people, some of the restrictions on the travel to those locations as well. But there's also slightly different business arrangements in a lot of those multi-unit complexes that may have caused it to be a little more difficult. Another trend that's come out of this also on that booking side of things is longer contracts. We're definitely seeing longer stays at these rentals. So over the past few years, we've seen stays drop, to only a few nights, 3 to 5 nights, depending on where you're at. Definitely has grown. We've seen some areas where they've grown upwards of 90 days at a time, just because people could afford it, wanted to get out of wherever they were, usually an urbanized setting, to be a little more safe and outside of that zone of potential COVID infection. One of the other trends, it's kind of a trend, it's not necessarily a trend, but what we're seeing, and just kind of as a warning, I guess, to everyone, is there's definitely been an increase in regulatory discussion around the general short-term rental debate that's been rearing its head all over the place. Across the country, no matter what state you're in. Back in March, it was like the light switch went off and everyone stopped talking about it for obvious reasons. And then for whatever reason, the minute everyone opened up their local governments again, they decided that short-term rentals were the first thing that they needed to debate. We're seeing this large and small communities. I'm not sure what is causing this. What's interesting about it is they're not necessarily referencing COVID-19 in these discussions. So they're not necessarily saying we're going to relook at or put these restrictions on or night caps or any type of limit because of COVID. They're just putting it together as a package. My assumption is that it is based on COVID. They're just not necessarily saying it that way, or they're trying to use the situation right now as a means to move some policy that they just had sitting there waiting for the right time. But I do have to say this is also where the Safe Home and Safe Community program that I mentioned earlier really comes in handy. Because one of the other trends that we're seeing right now is a demand for professionalism, both from policymakers, but also from the industry itself. I've never seen more uniting in this industry since I've started working with VRMA regarding the professional management community versus the rent by owner community. There definitely is a professionalism stake here that people are pushing. Policymakers are looking for that. One of the things that helped us reopen the state of Colorado was the fact that the governor didn't realize that professional management companies had things like cleaning standards like the hotels did. And now there's discussion of creating a whole category just for vacation rentals as a professional in case the state gets shut down again. So professionalism aspect is a huge thing right now across the board. And I foresee that going into, especially next year's legislative cycles nationwide. There's definitely going to be some regulatory discussion around cleaning standards and other standards with this industry. And the more you can push the professionalism angle, certifications, certificate programs, accreditation, you name it, they're going to be looking at that more so than I think they've ever looked before.
And to build off what Greg's saying, yeah, we have a tracking software that we utilize that looks at local government activities, and we have seen a surprising, I won't necessarily call it an uptick because it's been a part of the conversation in North Carolina for a while, as it has in many other states, but it's popping up a little bit more than we would have thought it would during a global pandemic where there more pressing issues to deal with. But from the NC Realtor side, we've been engaging on this issue for a number of years to try to provide more than anything clarity and understanding for the role that professional managers play in the economy and the industry, and the responsibility that they have to their clients through various state laws and regulations. That's been the biggest piece that we've been able to communicate to legislators as they consider their options on this subject. It's not as easy to do on a municipal level because there's 535 municipalities across the state of North Carolina, and there's only 170 legislators and about 9 of us on the lobbying team, so we can much more easily deal with the ones in the legislative building that is pictured behind me versus going out to all different corners of the state. But we continue it through the NC Realtors leadership, through the lobbying team, through the government affairs team. We hear from a lot of the other municipalities, and I I think it is a trend coming up. I don't know to what extent or with what fervor we'll see it from municipalities, especially given all of the other impacts that they're feeling. It's always for a lot of them an area for revenue to be generated through registration, through permitting fees, through all of that. But I'm not 100% sure where the appetite will be, especially in some of the larger municipalities where the monies would be greater. Cleaning standards absolutely will be a topic of conversation, both at the regulatory and at the legislative level. Just keeping folks healthy, safe, both now and well into the future is a high priority to anybody in public life. It's not part of a well-functioning system if your constituencies are not in good health and are not able to be productive in society in whatever manner they want to. And so that certainly drives the focus of those leaders. I think another trend, especially from the regulatory side, will be, and Will's touched on this a couple of times, will be in the good faith efforts that are taken to respond to these challenges. The policies and the legislation are certainly not as clear as we would want them to be. They aren't as situationally applicable as we need them to be sometimes. But as practitioners, it's vital that you continue to make the good faith effort to address the needs of your tenants, to address the needs of your landlords and your property owners, and as the landlord, in whatever way you can, being as forthright with your health and safety guidelines, masks, social distancing, disinfection activities. All of those is extremely important, because as I hear, and I sit with the commission members currently virtually, but in the times when I could sit with them in person, the commission members are less willing to punish or to sanction a broker or a licensee who has taken a good faith effort and through no direct fault of their own fallen out of compliance, or through a misinterpretation of how the law is supposed to read, especially in situations where the law is not exactly clear, but openly flaunting, openly objecting to something that is put in place for a reasonable purpose is not seen very favorably, especially when you're dealing with a board who has licensee representation on it. It has public representation as well, but in that balance, it always comes down to the licensees on that board and representation of the over 100,000 people who are licensed to practice in the state of North Carolina. There's no need for there to be one bad apple trying to spoil the whole bunch. And from the consumer side, if you made a reasonable effort, you were doing, and as Will has put it, a lot of times the best that you could at the time, and that's understandable. So those are all trends, but I think the biggest of all of them is that we need to continue to hear from folks in the field. And it's extremely valuable, as I've touched on, not just to me. I know Greg and his organization rely on touch points from all of the VRMA members across the country and the respective chapters and organizations and states to give them perspective as they go and deal with the members of Congress. But it's something that we will all work to continue to get through, but we can't do it without the interaction of everyone.
I'll just second what Seth says, and I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you. Thank you, all the panelists, and that section was incredibly helpful. And one of the trends that I saw, and Craig touched on it, was that all the organizations and associations working together. I saw a lot of NC VRMA members and their own local municipalities throughout all of this, coming together, banding together, implementing protocols, writing letters to their local councils and city officials. And so I think the teamwork and just the reach throughout the state that the organizations has been tremendous. And a big thank you to NC Realtors and VRMA on a national level for helping us rental agencies throughout all of this with your expertise and your input. And so we have a little bit more time left, and so I'm going to ask Rachel if we have any Q&A questions. I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel right now to see if we have any questions coming from the audience that any of the panelists can address. And thank you again, panelists, very much, and everyone for attending. And Rachel, I will turn it back over to you.
Wonderful. So we do have a great list of questions that you all have submitted. So thank you all for keeping those going as the conversation has developed and digging a little deeper into your questions about some of the topics that we've covered. So I'm going to start with one that should be a fairly quick answer, I would imagine. So Mary Jo is asking, with a multi-unit short-term rental that has common areas, what are some suggestions in how we can manage those common areas and enforce or encourage mask wearing?
I will try to take that. I am not a cleaning expert. I saw that question come in earlier. I'm actually going to ask the Vacation Rental Housekeeping Professionals Executive Director if he has any thoughts, and I can get back to you with some more specifics. But I think one of the biggest things is just limiting access, limiting how many people can go through, removing things that would encourage people to be in those common areas. Sanitation and is a huge thing, is making sure that you're sanitizing those areas as much as possible. When it comes to masks, I think one of the things, and really with the just anything with the common area as well, is communication with the guests prior to coming, making sure that it is well known before they come that these are expectations of the rental, and a warning to let them know that there is a common area there, as part of the rental. So I think if I'm going to guess correctly, that would be what I've gathered from what I've read the BRHP's put out, but I will double check for you and get some more info.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think as we talked about under House Bill 118, it's about providing signage, providing as many opportunities for someone who comes into your common area to understand the need for social distancing. I mean, you certainly can go as far as what you see in stores of marking out 6 feet away from certain things. I mean, it's certainly spatially dependent as far as what you can and can't actually in a reasonable way do.
Perfect. And so there's another question that's come in from Michael who kind of elaborates that on a little bit more, but he wants to know, and this came in while you all were talking about requiring guests to wear masks in your offices to help protect your employees. So Michael wants to know, how do you handle requiring that clients wear masks in your office in regards to the ADA exceptions? Is there any requirements, or would you ask for additional information? How would that play out?
Gosh, that's a good question. And I know there's some material on that issue on the NAR website. But yeah, I mean, if somebody's got a disability that makes it difficult or impossible for them to wear a mask, then there probably is an exception under the ADA, which regulates places of public accommodation. How much, I think I would probably tend to take somebody at their word. I don't know that I would require a whole lot of information. If somebody said, I've got, I don't know what it would be, some sort of a respiratory disease that, I have a hard time breathing, and putting on a mask makes it that much harder for me. I'd probably take them at their word. And you need to be able to anticipate how are you going to handle that exception with respect to, interactions with an employee who's going to have to deal with them on whatever they've come into your office for. So yeah, good question.
Yeah, and then just from a kind of a a more policy-driven side, I know that's been a conversation that's been had a lot in the retail industry. It's popped up on a lot of conversations and emails that I get on kind of in my other side of my job in the communications world. And so I think it's something that we'll need to continue to understand and grasp a little bit as time goes on. I know that's not necessarily a helpful answer, but it's an evolutionary answer.
Well, I will say real quickly, I had a call yesterday from a property manager, a long-term property manager, and she says that it's a trend now that when they call to make appointments to come in and do periodic inspections of rental premises to make sure the tenant isn't tearing the place up, that they're getting a real spike in tenants saying somebody's contracted COVID-19 in our family, and we're not going to let you come in. And her question was, can we require some evidence of that? Because we really think this is like the new thing, that people are using, and it seems to come from people who they suspect might be trying to hide something. So it was an interesting question, and I thought, my answer was, I think it's they've already told you that they've got COVID-19. They've disclosed to you that they've got this health condition. I don't think it would be inappropriate to ask for some supporting evidence that somebody in the household are actually contracted COVID-19 under those particular circumstances. So.
Wonderful. So real quickly, I just thank you for that insight, Will. We're right at time, but we've got a few more questions that we'd like to address. So for anyone who needs to jump off, I know Seth has another meeting that he has to hop onto, but for anyone else who needs to jump off the meeting, we are going to continue to record the answers to these questions, and we will make sure to pass that recording on to all of you who have registered by the end of this week. So thank you so much, Seth, for joining us. The rest of us are going to try to address just a couple more of these questions. Have a fantastic afternoon. Okay, so the next question, I know this is something that's been more come up more recently than earlier on during COVID-19, but Mark wants to know, travelers from New York and other states now have mandatory quarantine periods that they must abide by after they have traveled to North Carolina. Many are requesting refunds due to this new policy that was not in effect at the time of the booking. Do we happen to know what the Real Estate Commission's stance is on the legality of holding the firm to the lease's cancellation policy versus refunding the guest in full? And I'm not sure that we do have an answer to that, but it's a great question.
Yeah, it is a great question. I don't know how the Real Estate Commission would analyze that. Based on what I've seen so far, if the property is available for rental, it's more difficult, I guess, for the guest to travel, but it's not impossible. The rental premises are still available. I think just from a pure legal standpoint, I'm not sure that gives them the right to cancel the lease and get a refund. There are some extraordinary remedies. There's the doctrine of impossibility of performance or frustration of essential purpose, that I could see a tenant maybe trying to argue that although it wasn't impossible for us to come, it frustrated the essential purpose of our vacation to be able to come to North Carolina for a week's vacation and then have to quarantine for 2 weeks when I get home. What kind of a vacation is that? So I could see somebody trying to argue that, and I don't know if that would be successful or not. Normally those kinds of claims have to be combined with there being some unforeseen event that nobody could have anticipated. Well, at one time, back in about March, maybe that's a good argument that we didn't anticipate this pandemic rolling over us the way it did. But, nobody should be surprised now, right, that there might be something put in place that's going to make it difficult for you to travel somewhere. So I'm not sure that would be a very, very solid legal claim, just looking at it from a pure legal standpoint.
Wonderful. Let's see. So Scott has asked our next question, and he wants to know, let's see, vacation rental companies employed a variety of policies regarding refund and cancellations to guests during restricted periods. Some gave refunds, others offered credits for another period of time. Do you foresee any regulatory initiatives that will direct rental companies on what actions they must take during these circumstances? And that might be more of a Seth question.
Yeah, I wish Seth were still on the phone, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not much of a crystal ball person, but based on my experiences with the Real Estate Commission over many years now, they tend to be pretty conservative and tend to rely on what they've got in place, and they don't tend to jump and adopt a lot of regulations to deal with whatever the issue of the day is. So if I had to guess, and I wouldn't, put more than about a quarter on it, I doubt that I'd be surprised if we see a lot of regulations coming out, at least from the Real Estate Commission, to try to, address those kinds of issues.
Hey, Rachel, in New Jersey, there was one bill that popped up early during COVID, probably about April or so, that would have forced all rentals to issue refunds across the board. And it did not pass for obvious reasons. There were many legal problems with what they were trying to do. But as far as I know, that's really the only one nationally that had popped up and is not taken off at all.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Let's see here. This is an interesting question. So David wants to know, let's see, the way states, counties, and cities are looking at short-term rentals, for example, Airbnb, VRBO, is it still worth buying a property for that purpose, especially in the Carolinas or in the general Region 4 area?
Well, I guess I could say that's a personal decision to make. Based on the data though, right now, it clearly shows that there's a rebound of interest. If you're not looking to rent, there's actually, and this is a little anecdotal, but a few of our members down in the Panhandle in Florida are actually reporting very high sales or purchases of vacation homes for personal use, not necessarily to rent them out. And they're actually citing the reason being that there's a fear that there's going to be another long-term, stay-at-home order. And if that's the case, they want to do it in Florida, not wherever else they live. So there has been an uptick. She cited one of her title company had told her that they're just inundated with business right now, all vacation homes.
I'd have to defer to Seth on this one too. I've certainly heard about a number of local governments trying to implement short-term bans that would, effectively preclude anybody from operating an Airbnb. But I really don't have a feel for, how successful those have been or whether or not that's a real trend.
Thank you both. So on to our next question from Wayne. Wayne asks, if a vacation rental offers a community pool and fitness area as an amenity, how liable would the owner be if the guests were to claim that they got ill using that amenity? And I feel like, Will, you may have touched on this a little bit earlier.
Yeah. I think I would have a serious question about whether or not that would be an amenity I might close off, Yeah. But to begin with, but if you keep it open and, if it's, I think there's, and you've got proper signage and, I think there's definitely an argument that there's an assumption of risk there that would make it difficult, as long as you, did follow some reasonable protocols about sanitizing things at the end of the day or whatever they would be. I think it's going to be difficult for them to prevail, even if they can prove that that's where they got COVID-19, which, as I said, is problematic to begin with.
Absolutely. So I've got one more question, and this one's maybe a little more lighthearted, not so much around regulatory issues, but Tracy wants to know, where can owners and managers find disinfectant sprays and wipes when the stores don't have any? You know, where do we go in order to find the supplies that we need in order to show that we're making the effort to keep our spaces clean and sanitized?
I think the answer for me is we have and it's publicly available, but we do have a supplier list of just companies that supply anything within the industry on the VRMA.org website. You can just go to suppliers and go through that list. I don't necessarily want to pinpoint any specific company, but there are larger hospitality companies that do sell in bulk, and you can go through those companies and find the materials that you're looking for.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
The only thing I would add is that, this seems kind of crazy, but document your efforts to find things, make contemporaneous notes about, or maybe you can document, print out copies of, just your efforts to try to do the right thing. It may really come back and help you if push comes to shove. Heck, I'd make note of the fact that you participated in this call today. I tell people regularly, remember, if you call the real estate commission and ask them a question, be sure to write down who you spoke with and when it was, and make a note of what you think they told you, and do the same when you talk to me. I can't be your lawyer and provide you legal advice, but on the hotline, but write down the fact you spoke with Will Martin on July 22nd and what the nature of our conversation was. And you're trying to do the right thing. You're trying to get the answer. It's important.
Absolutely. That's absolutely fantastic advice, Will. It's better to be safe than sorry, and document for sure. So at this point, I'm going to pass things over to Tricia to see if she has any final questions or anything like that for our panelists. Oh, hold on. Tricia, I think you're muted. Let me try to unmute you from my end over here. There you go. Try that.
I am muted. Yes, thank you very much, panelists and Rachel, for today, and everybody from joining in on this webinar. It just shows how important this industry is to the state of North Carolina and nationally, of course. And thank you all for being part of the conversation and help providing solutions. Again, thank you, Rachel, and to everyone, be well, and we'll see you on the next webinar at some point. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank